Does this look stupid? Probably looks a little stupid, but that's fine. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie if you're new here. I hope your day is going well. And today we're going to do a video that I already filmed, but I didn't like what I had filmed, so I'm redoing it. And we're going to do, if you disliked this book, you're gonna like this book recommendation video. I saw this video on Emma Books' channel, and hers, she was talking about how, like, it's not supposed to be shady, and I'm gonna tell you guys right now, this video is gonna be full of shade. There's definitely a few one-star books that I'm going to be talking about in a relationship to the book that I want to recommend off of them, but there actually is a few on my list of books that I did enjoy. I think there's at least one 5-star book that I'm going to be talking about in the frame of disliking it. But I do think that any book can be beat by another book if you have certain elements that you didn't like. That's what I'm going to explore in this video. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. But basically, if you liked any of the books that I'm going to be talking about in the dislike portion of this video, that's totally fine. You'll probably still like the books that I'm recommending based off them anyway. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I disliked and the books that I think you'll like if you also disliked those books. Moving on, because this got way too lengthy already. And the first book that we're going to be talking about is Fury Borna by Claire Legrand. I was in the minority in disliking this book. I'm well aware of that fact. This book is about two queens, the Sun Queen and the Blood Queen, and we have two female perspectives in this book, and they are tied together by magic and prophecy and blood, and it has a very Venetian air to the world, and I just ended up hating this book. I did give this book 1 star. There are elements in this book that I just think were done very, very poorly, in my opinion. This is definitely my opinion. I know a lot of people love this book, but I just thoroughly did not like the time travel or the female perspectives in this book. I felt like the female perspectives were done incredibly poorly. I could not tell the difference between them. But if you did like this book, or if you didn't like it like I did, I think you would absolutely love The Tethered Mage by Melissa Caruso. This is about Amalia. Amalia is a politician's daughter in a very Venetian-esque world a la Fury Borna, and she becomes magically bonded to a fire mage called Zyra. This book was actually pitched to me as a female-female romance, but it is in fact not. But the world is so interesting, and the dynamic between Zyra and Amalia is so fun and so fascinating, and the depth that the world is developed is so fascinating and so wonderful that I have to say that if you liked Fury Borna, if you didn't like it like I did, you will definitely like The Tethered Mage. And I also want to say that this has a slow burn romance that I thoroughly enjoyed, whereas Fury Borna, for a teen book, has graphic sex scenes that I did not appreciate and wasn't expecting. And this being an adult book, having backed away from that, was actually more refreshing than anything else, and I think is more appropriate for the audience that Fury Borna was written for than for Fury Borna itself. So I hope that if you didn't like Fury Borna, if you did like it, you'll give Tethered Mage a try, because I'm all about this series. I already have the second one from the library, and I plan on reading it very soon. I just think that this book did a much better job of what Fury Borna was trying to do than what Fury Borna ended up doing. And moving on to the next book that I absolutely fucking hated. It is the Merciless by Daniel Vega. If you've been on my channel long enough, you know this is one of my most hated books that I've read because of BookTube. This happens to be about a group of teenage girls exorcising one of their classmates, and it depends heavily on gore for shock value and has basically no plotline. Full offense here, guys. This book was blurbed to me as like Mean Girls plus Stephen King, and I really fucking wanted that, so I went looking for it, and you betcha, I found it. And I will present to you guys My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I have talked about this book a few times on my channel, specifically around this time of year, because this book manages to do what the Merciless was trying to do, but actually succeeds. This is about Gretchen and Abby. They've been best friends since 4th grade, and they are entering their sophomore year of high school together. Beforehand, they go skinny dipping with a bunch of friends, and Gretchen ends up going off on her own, and she comes back different. This book actually explores how far you would go for one of your friends. This book is graphic, I will tell you that, but it doesn't rely on gore and disgusting elements for shock value, and actually has a plot line that is really interesting and not disgusting. I would highly recommend it if you're looking for a book that has those elements in it because I definitely think this book succeeds where the Merciless does not at all. It's actually really cool, and the hardcover is really cool because it's actually written on. It's fascinating. All right, another comparison that is incredibly divisive will be starting off with Night Film by Marisha Pessl. I know I'm also in the minority of people not liking Night Film. This book is about a disgraced journalist investigating the death of the daughter of the infamous director of cult horror films Cordova. He lives reclusively on an estate and hasn't been seen or heard from, and all of a sudden his daughter dies by suicide, and the disgraced journalist wants to find out what happened to her because he has a vendetta against Cordova. I wanted so much more from Night Film. There's mixed media elements at the beginning of the book that just stop, and it also stops really doing anything fantastical. It's a psychological thriller, which is understandable, but at the same time, I just wanted so much more from it, and it just didn't go as far as I wanted it to. I know a lot of people actually liked that, but if you didn't like that, I think you will really like the book that I'm going to recommend, because it definitely doubles down on those fantastical elements. And that book is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This is a teen novel, whereas Night Film is an adult novel, so this is kind of an interesting parallel. But I know a lot of people actually didn't like The Hazelwood because of the fantastical elements it goes in on. This is about Alice, and her grandmother is this infamous, once again, reclusive author of fairy tales who lives on the estate the Hazelwood. When Alice's mother disappears and creatures who eerily resemble characters from Alice's grandmother's fairy tales start showing up, Alice has to go out to find her mother and figure out what the fuck is going on. This book could have stayed urban fantasy, but it actually doubles down on those fantastical elements that I was hoping for, so I thoroughly enjoyed it, whereas I know a lot of people actually didn't like that aspect of this book, but I think that if you didn't like Night Film, you will like this book because of that. But if you also did like Night Film, this book has such a similar plotline that I think you should just give it a try and see if you like it. This book is very dark for a teen novel, and I was really loving that because the fantastical elements are just so creepy and weird and out there for a teen novel that I was actually genuinely surprised by how far this book went, and I really enjoyed it because of that. Sleeve is slipping. And next up we have The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is the book that I absolutely loved when I read it. I'm pretty sure I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. This is a retelling of the Scheherazade myth, and it is an Arabian-inspired world, which is fascinating. This is about Shazi. She marries the Caliph of Khorasan, whatever, and she does this even though he kills his brides the next morning every time he gets married, and her intention is to marry him and murder him before he murders her. And as you can probably tell, love ensues, so things get a little wonky. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, as I just said. This book has incredibly beautiful prose, it has an interesting world, I really liked the characters, but looking back on it now, it definitely doesn't do some things as well as it could have. The magic system in this very short series, it's only a duology, it's not fleshed out, the side characters aren't really delved into. The prose definitely doesn't go as far as I wanted it to describe this interesting world. But if you had the same issues that I had, or even more so, I would highly suggest you read The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I know that there's a lot of people probably guessing that this book was coming, but this is one of my all-time favorite Arabian-inspired books. This is about Nari. She is a thief in Napoleon-era Cairo, and she accidentally summons a genie, and then the genie's like, hey, we're gonna go to the City of Brass, and things ensue. This is a wonderfully interesting and vastly complex novel that really details the way the social hierarchies and the magic systems work in this world, and it doubles down once again on the Arabian myths that it's based on, and it really explores those, and it's fascinating. And the romance in this, oh boy guys, oh boy, is so good. It's so good. This definitely did everything that The Wrath and the Dawn was trying to do, and did it much better, which I don't want to put The Wrath and the Dawn down because I did thoroughly enjoy that book, but I definitely think that if you liked The Wrath and the Dawn or didn't like The Wrath and the Dawn, you're gonna love The City of Brass because it just does all of those elements and does it 10 times better than I could have ever expected from it. It's fascinating, it's wonderful, the characters are so good, and the world is so interesting, and I just highly suggest you read this because It's one of my favorite books, guys. It's one of my favorite books. Alright, and then the last recommendation duo that I'm going to be doing starts with Genuine Fraud by E. Lockhart. This happens to be a teen thriller that I read because I ended up with the arc. It's definitely not my typical genre, but I did enjoy it to some extent. This follows Jewel in a reverse timeline, and all we really know at the beginning of the story is that Jewel had a friend named Imogen, and something happened to her. Something probably really bad. And we follow Jewel, but there are just so many disconnects between the characters. At no point did I not really know what was going to happen to the characters or actually care, unfortunately. And in a psychological thriller, you do have to care about the characters in some way, and I think a book that did that so much better than Genuine Fraud was Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton. This is an adult novel, and it follows Louise, who's a 29-year-old woman living in New York City, and she is broke AF. And then she befriends Lavinia, who is rich as fuck. So we follow these two as they become intertwined and basically bonded at the hip, and what do you know, something goes terribly wrong. The one thing that I think this book did so much better than Genuine Fraud was the fact that I knew that every single one of these characters, even the side characters, were terrible, terrible, terrible people, but I cared. I cared what they did next. I knew they were going to do something stupid, but I actually fundamentally cared, and that is something that I think a psychological thriller has to do, especially when you're working with anti-heroes. This book had me knowing what was going to happen, but actually still caring anyway, wanting to see what these characters were going to do, knowing they were going to make the wrong choice, and inevitably being surprised by my own admiration for terrible, terrible people. And I think that if you're looking for a psychological thriller, I would recommend this one by far before Genuine Fraud, just because this one actually had me on the edge of my seat, and I read this entire thing in one sitting, despite the fact that psychological thrillers are not my cup of tea, typically speaking. Alright guys, those were my if you disliked that book, you will like this book recommendations. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up. This is not my outro, what am I doing? If you happen to have a book that you disliked and you want a book for me to recommend based off that, leave them down below in the comments. I'm gonna go now guys, like, subscribe, all the good stuff, bye!